Welcome to episode 29 of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. This time around, I'm thrilled to welcome Megan Reif from Volvo Cars as our distinguished guest. Joining me, Alan Walker, are my co-hosts Alison Etridge and Toby Culshaw, ready to dive into an insightful conversation. In our news segment, Toby will shed light on the latest shifts and trends in talent intelligence, touching on innovative recruitment strategies and how companies are navigating the changing labour landscape. Megan's segment promises to be a highlight as we explore her fascinating journey from academia to the forefront of talent intelligence at Volvo Cars. We'll delve into her approach to leveraging data and recruitment, the impact of talent intelligence on HR practices, and the future of skills-based hiring. Megan will share her unique perspective on the evolving role of talent intelligence in shaping organisational strategy and enhancing workforce capabilities. So buckle up for a deep dive into the world of talent intelligence with Megan Reif. Whether you're a seasoned professional or new to the field, there's something in this episode for everyone. Stay tuned, keep learning, and as always, stay intelligent. Before we get on with the main event, I just wanted to remind you that this podcast is proudly sponsored by our friends at Stratagens, and here's a very well-spoken chap to tell you a little bit more about them.
Stratagens gives HR leaders the data they need to transform businesses with the speed and ease required in today's world. If you're ready to make decisions that aren't lengthy, costly, one-dimensional, or based on gut feeling, visit stratagens.com. That's stratagens.com to register for a Wednesday demo drop-in and find out more.
Hello, I'm Alan Walker, and welcome to episode 29 of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast, the very first of 2024.
Yay!
A little yay. I'm joined on the show by my co-host Alison Etridge of Stratagens and Toby Culshaw of Amazon. Say hello.
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 You normally say hello, guys.
Do I? I said
Yeah.
hello, folks, this time. Oh, well.
Hello. Okay, here we
Of
are.
course, as ever, we have with us a guest. And for today's episode, it's Megan Reif of Volvo. Megan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here.
We're honoured to have you. Can you give us a quick intro about who you are and what it is you do, please?
Well, my current role is I am talent intelligence lead at Volvo Cars. I have been doing this for a little bit over a year, building a function from scratch. But talent intelligence is actually the culmination of something that David White calls a pilgrimage of identity in his book, Crossing the Unknown Sea, Work as a Pilgrimage of Identity. And it resulted from an identity crisis after falling in love with a Swede and deciding to stay in Sweden after being a guest researcher in political science at the University of Gothenburg. And this is actually what happened is I had a somewhat involuntary experience with skills-based hiring. And in retrospect, you can see a red thread in my personal story around applying data and research to challenge conventional wisdom and assumptions. But the reality was that my life has been more meandering. When I grow up, I want to be a recruiter. Said no child ever. And I think those of us who work in talent acquisition would also agree that our parents probably would not have jumped for joy had they heard us saying that. And so that's what crossed my mind when after I was a professor of political science and a guest researcher at the University of Gothenburg. I had been a final candidate after having this identity crisis and figuring out that I wouldn't stay in academia. I was a final candidate for business analyst and data roles in Sweden, and I didn't get the job. My Swedish wasn't so great then. The recruiting firm offered me a job as a recruiter, and I thought, "Oh, what is this?" I'm an American from Wyoming, a little town in the Rocky Mountains, and I was a high school debate nerd. Was very ambitious. I spent high school in the library doing research. I ended up in college working on competitive debate and then spent a summer in Pakistan doing research on women's work, incidentally. I had an internship at the Department of Defense in humanitarian affairs, but doing intelligence, and spent a year in Pakistan as a Fulbright scholar. I did some research intel for the steel industry, research in the steel industry for a lobbying law firm, and then worked for an organization trying to lobby Congress to support peace process in Afghanistan. And then I ended up working for Jimmy Carter's health and democracy programs as a professional fundraiser, but we had to use metrics with all of our donors. So with a lot of KPIs, data-driven decision-making about where we would put our programs in public health. And then I went to grad school for a PhD because I thought I would end up in diplomacy but I drank the Kool-Aid and really embraced the quantitative scientific method and ended up as an academic teaching research methods, teaching statistics, survey methods. So you can imagine when I accepted the job as a recruiter, I saw it as a temporary diversion. I thought, I'll learn Swedish, but I ended up loving it. I didn't know anything about sourcing and recruitment, so I was just using Boolean search because that's what I did to find sources of data for other projects. So I immediately, from day one, was using data on markets to explain to hiring managers and our many different clients why it was taking 10 weeks to hire a developer. And another reason I loved it is I had lived in Pakistan with 27 women. And on the surface, you'd look at what they were wearing and never guess that they were aerospace engineers and developers. And I also taught statistics and methods to people in Morocco, Algeria, Pakistan. And they were amazing technical talents. And so when I started working in talent acquisition, I was like, wow, people just have the image of certain types of people, certain universities, certain countries, and they're all wrong. So I started early, but now I do this a lot. Like, for example, did you know that the percentage of software developers and STEM experts who are women in Western countries is far lower? It's about 16 to 17%, whereas in the Middle East and North Africa, it's about almost 50%. Mm-hmm. So I started showing this kind of data to hiring managers, and it really changed the decision making. And the CEO of the recruitment firm told me, she was saying she saw my skill set and she said, you need to work in talent acquisition. And if I want to influence society, social diversity, integration of refugees, I should work in talent acquisition. And she was right. But it was a skills-based decision. And I thought, I'm not so sure I want to do this. And then TI, I was working as a user experience recruiter, thought I had left my data world behind me. And then someone at Volvo Cars said, oh, wait, you're a data person. So they brought me into a location strategy project. And there it was. It was skills-based hiring. You're a data person. So
that's just so cool hearing you talk about it. What you threw in so much there within kind of 4 minutes. It was like, oh wow, oh God, okay, right. What makes you tick? Out of all of that, you've talked about Morocco, you've talked about engineering, you've talked about falling in love with the Swede, you've talked about working in Pakistan. What is it that makes you tick?
I would say I'm infinitely curious about just about anything. Mm-hmm. And my superpower, which is my people have said, Megan, you can talk to a stone and find it interesting and help it match it with another stone for harmony. So I just find everything so interesting. And the second thing is that's digging deep on the actual facts behind our assumptions. So almost always, whatever we think is true is probably not true. So I love that digging and uncovering something that's surprising.
What would you have been if you hadn't done political science and you hadn't then fallen into recruitment and talent acquisition?
I used to think I wanted to be a university debate coach if I hadn't. I went to a university that had one of the best debate teams because I saw myself being a debate coach.
That's quite cool. Do you think you're argumentative then?
Yes. I mean, but not for the sake of argument. But if I see something isn't quite right, I'm not afraid to raise my hand. And even if someone's a VIP and very important, I can tend to raise my hand and say, wait a minute, that might not be the case. Let's look at the facts. And then I can only have confidence to do that if I'm armed with data.
Okay, all right, okay. That sounded a bit accusatory. Sorry, it wasn't supposed to be. It was just like, I know that when I talk about stuff, it's like, if I talk to my husband, I go, "Oh my God, I get paid to be nosy, right? Mm-hmm. I get paid to ask people questions, and it's a similar kind of curiosity, which is, oh God, what is it? But equally, I get accused of, just being, oh, for God's sake, we just give it a rest and just accept something for a minute. So there's a balancing act. I want to do a whole bunch more about some of the work that you've done abroad and how that kind of plays in to your role in talent acquisition. But I wanted to do that when we kind of really get into Megan and manufacturing. So for the time being, let's revert back and do some news and then see how that flows into the wider conversation. Does that work for you?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Perfect. Thank you. That was the longest intro we've ever done, but it was brilliant. Thank you, Megan. For any new listeners out there, the usual running order would be Toby will launch into the news, and then we'll do lots of questions, but we've kind of mixed it up a little bit this time, which is absolutely fine. So we'll run through the news in a second, and then we'll formally hand over to our interviewer extraordinaire, Alison, and she'll start firing the questions at Megan, so we can start to hear her views on TI and the wider world. And then me and Toby might pop up here and then. And at the end, I will definitely pop back in and annoyingly bring the podcast to a firm close. Something like that, anyway. So, Toby, on with the show, as they say. Over to you. What's happening in the world?
Thank you very much. I actually was far more enjoying that initial segment than the news. So anyway, we'll carry on with the news. It won't be as exciting, but I'll try my best. So there's been quite a few interesting bits coming out in the last month or so. I saw a really nice bit by the Visual Capitalist, who was actually themselves drawing information and data from a report by CBRE, and it was mapping out the biggest tech talent hubs in the USA and Canada. But in particular, you got the obvious things, San Fran and New York remain the main centres for tech, etc. But the bit that really stood out for me was Canada. And Vancouver, Calgary and Montreal all seen the highest growth rates over the last 5 years. And I think it ties in really nicely with what we've been discussing historically around both what countries are doing from an attractiveness perspective and that whole kind of population pyramid, reduced workforce. Canada have been very open about their immigration policies, and they're very open a little while back saying anyone with H-1B issues in the US post-layoff, just jump on over the wall and come over to us. Or they don't have a wall, do they? They have a strip of land across their forest. But anyway, just come pop across and you can come work for us instead. And I think particularly Vancouver, obviously just the other side from Seattle, I think that's been a really big push. And I think they're doing some really interesting stuff and really driving Canada as a tech powerhouse in North America.
It's also
on that too. That was super exciting to hear that Nigeria is one of the main feeders to the Canadian cities. And I thought that's a lesson to learn there, because Nigeria has an amazing startup hub, lots of tech talent. So I was happy to hear a story about looking beyond our common assumptions about where talent is.
It's also a great way of boosting diversity, right? So the Canadian workforce, because of their immigration policy, is in its own right very diverse. And you've touched on Nigeria. There's a huge Asian community as well, and a significant proportion of females in the tech workforce. So just really interesting. And I guess we'll touch a little bit as well on kind of country-based skills acquisition later. But this is Canada's chance. The other bit I thought was interesting in this is, thank God the CBREs of this world are finally starting to go, actually, it's not just about property, it's about everything. Yeah. And, labour market economics, location. Just really interesting that they are really jumping into this space.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think even within the US itself, when you look at the map, it does like a heat map of what cities are growing and versus not growing quite so much. And it's nice to see that it's across the US. You're seeing big growth in these cities. It's not just San Fran and New York. You're seeing big growth, like up to like 70% growth in places like Denver and Dallas and Phoenix. And I think that's really exciting to see, is that kind of spread of the tech jobs, which traditionally are some of the highest paying jobs. They are being spread across the country now, and you are seeing a much broader spread. How this is affected with a lot of tech firms doing return to office and retrenching back to their main corporate hubs, etc. Whether this will change in the next 18 months or so, it'll be interesting to see. But personally, I think it's really exciting to see the amount of growth in the other areas.
It's also Europe as well. I've read that now, finally, because of some of the layoffs in the US, European companies are able to attract American talent that maybe had not been interested because of lower salaries and no stock options.
Yeah, really cool. But I also wonder whether we'll see some of the levelling up in places in Europe as well. We're still a bunch of countries where there are predominant cities for particular types of talent. It'll be really interesting to see whether we see more levelling up of the workforce in every country in Europe.
Completely agree. But I think that kind of flows in the conversation we had way back when we first post-COVID and saw lots of remote work, and like, is this the deindustrialization? Are we seeing a move back to more rural? And I think with all this stuff, talent is a factor, but it's not the only factor. And there's always this big political pressure to keep the industrial base in cities and all of the kind of economy that's based around that as well. So I do think there's still a fair amount of work to go before things are properly deindustrialized or evened out, to be honest.
Yeah, completely.
Next on the chopping block. Yeah, thank you very much. Next on the chopping block, I wanted to talk about an article by Ben over at Revelio Labs. I love Revelio and the stuff they do, and Ben's frequently posting on stuff on LinkedIn. They did a dig into HR job families and job codes, and it's Move Over HR, AI is the new recruiter. And it was really digging into the number of job postings mentioning AI skills within HR and how it's really surged ahead of other listings. And I thought it was really interesting. We're really seeing this push at the moment of trying to get AI into HR. We've seen many C-suite people saying that, and Josh Burson actually did an article about it last night. I was listening about the C-suite seeing HR as one of the biggest burdens within the entire organization, and TA specifically in recruiting as one of the biggest burdens. So it's a really interesting time at the moment. Fascinating to see how we're really having this big drive for AI within HR when, Alan, you're probably the biggest source of knowledge on this for us. But I don't think we've really had AI within HR, broadly speaking. We've had some process automation stuff. We've had a bit of natural language processing stuff, but a lot of the skills I think people are looking for within HR, I think it's going to be a real war for talent because there isn't any talent doing this stuff historically. We haven't got years and years and years of experience, but what's your take?
I think, for me, it's great because we have the talent in our business that can help organisations leverage this. So it's wonderful for us because HR leaders are coming to order and saying, our CEO is saying we need to use AI in HR, and I don't even understand what that means. It's most of the time the kind of questions we're getting, and it surprises me. It doesn't surprise me there's a lack of talent because I see that firsthand. It's interesting that the bar is really, really low in HR to do anything that from a technological perspective to a certain degree. There's HR teams, without being disparaging about my client base, some HR teams struggle to run reports from a HCM. So asking them to fully embrace AI and run it all the way through their organization is a big leap forward. So it makes sense that they're looking to bring those skills in. Whether those skills exist, they do, yeah. But whether the people with those skills want to work in HR, that's a completely different thing in my mind.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I was going to say, I love the stuff that gets written on this, but anything that gets written on demand for me is just dream. It's like you've got to look at the supply. You've got to look at because that's the reality is, do we have the people to do this? And I think Alan's hit the nail on the head. There aren't people in HR with these skills. We know that from profile analysis, right? So you've got to look outside of HR in order to attract these skills in. And then you've got to think about, well, why would people want to come in to do this? And that's the bigger question. It's not, let's stop beating HR over the head for not having skills that we've never trained them to have. No. Yeah. And start thinking about how do we get this skills base to come into what could be an exciting function if it stopped being eaten up by the rest of the business.
I think we can make it really exciting for them. I work with an internship program that should be called consulting for newcomers to Sweden, and often grab them before they've found a position, and data scientists and data engineers. And one of them was coming from a data engineering background, data analytics, and she said she had never even thought of this space, and said it was so much more interesting than sensor data from machines.
Yes.
And then after 2 months, she actually found a position sort of in a people analytics / talent intelligence role, the only person at another company. And now she's working with internal HR data. And she said, wow, I had no HR data is one of the most complex, interesting, and I'm never going to judge HR again. And so I think it's just a matter of exposing some of these talents to these questions that we have.
I think that's so true. If I think about some of the master students that come and work with us, their starting point is always, oh my God, we want to work with you because the data is complex, it's huge. The opportunity to play with the data rather than look for statistical analysis and trends is massive. What can this data tell us? You start from a very different view, right? Which is what's the problem we're trying to solve and how can the data help us, rather than here's a bunch of data. Now let me make some trends out of it. That's a bit disparaging of other areas.
It sounds to me like we've got two things. One is a branding problem for HR around what we are and how interesting we actually are, but also then the possible reason for that is the commercial impact of HR. And I know we've discussed this before and it's been discussed ad nauseum, but I think the reason people go into other areas of the business, they can see a direct line of sight to the commercial impact. And so they get the funding, they get the growth, they get the career development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think within HR, we're still really struggling. And I think the complexity of the data architecture isn't helping. Like the fact that you've got companies out there with, Alan, you'd have seen the worst cases, but, you hear horror stories of people with like half a dozen different CRM and ATS systems and different HCM suite, and they're all trying to talk to each other. And then they've got mini arguments around, well, I'm using time to hire in this definition, and I'm using this definition. And it's like, guys, we're just fighting against ourselves while the business cracks on. Like we can't prove anything here. We can't drive any value until we get a consistent data architecture, a consistent level playing field, etc.
I think data literacy as well. Again, go back to my point earlier, there's a real lack of data literacy in HR generally and understanding what it means. It goes back to, again, the CEO asked the question, we want to be a data-driven organization, and that needs to apply to HR as well. And then HR being tasked with doing something that they're not particularly strong at. Generally, I'm generalizing massively there, but there are plenty that really, really struggle with that space. So they're taking something. They've then got, to your point, Toby, this really disjointed data set to play around with across various systems that don't talk to each other, that aren't joined up in any way, shape, or form. And then they don't have the skills internally to do anything with it. So it's a real challenge, and I do feel for them. And often, and the other challenge is that often when C-suite are saying to HR, I want you to use AI, what they're really saying is, I want you to automate the shit out of as many of your processes as possible, so we can strip back HR's headcount.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to sound like a broken record on this, but until we are all comfortable talking about the talent and the skills that we have as an asset to an organisation, and talking about them in terms of human capital, and I know I sound like a broken record, that nobody is going to join those dots and say, actually, this is why it matters. Because if you treated access to financial capital in the same way that you treated access to human capital, all the businesses that we work with would be belly up, right? It's just, they don't do it. And I think that's the fight that HR has got, is we need to strike this balance between individuals are people and worthy as individuals and people, but as a collective, that collection of skills that happens to be in those individuals is an asset, and we should treat it as an asset and manage it and train it and develop it and invest in it as an asset. And I just think that just gets missed the whole time and gets lost in fluffiness.
Do you think that's also driven from the fact that the stickiness of it, it's kind of a vicious circle, isn't it? Because people don't stay in companies as long as they used to. So you get the whole, well, if we overinvest in them, they're going to leave. Well, if you don't invest, they're going to, and they stay, you're in trouble. But you've got kind of then the compound of, well, we don't want to spend money on all this stuff because it is such a fluid capability and an asset. It's not like you can buy a person and keep them on the shelf for 10 years like you can a bit of manufacturing equipment or whatever. Like there is a fluidity to it you can't control. And I wonder whether that inhibits it, but also pure and simple, the financial accounting. Like as long as it doesn't hit the balance sheet in that way, it's not going to be seen in the same light.
Have you seen them? I'm going to give a great shout out to Ollie Megan out at the Skills Collective. And I don't know the validity of what they've done, but actually they've tried to build a calculator that puts a cost on the skills value of an organisation, which I think is quite clever. I need to have a look at it. In fact, we should maybe have them on. But there's something about trying to put a number, trying to put a dollar value against skills so that it hits the balance sheet. I think is quite clever.
Well, that actually ties into one of the other news bits. I was going to save it till last, but I'll rip it in this bit instead. Was Deloitte did a survey in 2022 of just over 1,000 workers, 200 businesses and HR execs, and 98% said they plan to move towards being a skills-based organisation. And it's a really interesting article that they've launched about it called "Becoming a Skills-Based Organisation." Easier said than done, and it goes through various different examples and different companies, etc. But it also touches back on what we've discussed historically, which is yes, you can go to skills-based identification and skills-based hiring, be it external hiring or internal hiring, but that's only kind of phase one. Like understanding what skills people have, fine. Understanding whether they actually want to use those skills, understanding what's their level of competency with all those skills. But then you still got to reverse back into, all right, well, we now need a skills-based taxonomy rather than jobs-based taxonomy. We need a skills-based job architecture for promos and career paths. And it really just flows down and affects everything in the HCM suite. And I think it was still way, way, way off all of that stuff.
Definitely. This is such a huge challenge. I think we've moved to a skills-based taxonomy. And I think we often see skills-based hiring as something that's good for candidates. So the focus is on having, for example, in order to do skills-based hiring, you have to have managers being willing to let go of people on their teams who are doing things maybe those people don't want to do anymore. But then you have candidates from other companies who want to see, but I'm a UX designer 1, 2, and 3, and then the candidates themselves want to have that prestige or title change. So when you're recruiting to Sweden, we're a very flat organization and have not had a lot of titles that are variable. Candidates from societies where they want to see that advancement resist that. And one thing I think the problem with skills-based hiring is it's still based on past skills or self-reported skills. And I think one of the best interview questions I've found is to ask someone, what is something you're really good at that you don't want to do anymore? And if we could take that to an aggregate level and figure out, what is something that someone's starting to learn that they're going to be good at? And we don't really have a good model for looking at that internally or in market data.
This is really interesting for me personally. So we're a relatively small business. 16 of us now. We were 5, 12 months ago.
Growing like Billy-O,
like Billy-O, admittedly. But what we're trying to do is make sure that everybody in the organisation, because we're ultimately we earn money from selling our people's time because we're a consulting business. What we're trying to do is avoid, where possible, as many kind of what you would call your typical kind of corporate function roles, your head office roles, etc., and just concentrate on hiring people who will be ultimately billable. But we realise that then that leaves us some big gaps in certain areas like marketing and sales and legal and finance and yada yada yada. So we've just started a process of going through the whole team and saying, look, we know that you guys love doing what you're doing around the consulting space, but we also think you might like to get involved in some of the wider pieces of running the business, growing the business, etc., beyond just doing client-facing work. So we kicked something off in December where we went through that similar thing that you talked about, Megan, where we asked people, what are you good at? At the moment, we haven't got any real deep scientific way of assessing that. So we are led a little bit by them. But more importantly, we said, what would you like to do? And then we're kind of correlating those two things. And it's amazing how many people have said, I'd love to get involved in more finance stuff. I'd love to get involved in more of the commercial conversations, building out our billing structure, for example, and how we price our work. I'd love to learn more around kind of project management beyond just kind of traditional consulting. And then what we're spinning up is little project teams of collectives of 2 or 3 people in each of the areas where they're saying they're interested, and they're then fleshing that out and understanding what that looks like. And all of them are only giving up like 10, 15% of their time to concentrate on that. But then suddenly you've got collectively almost a whole person that's focusing on a particular area. And for an organization of our size, a whole person looking at legal, for example, or looking at finance or looking at marketing is actually quite a lot of a person. And it's been incredible, the way the team have thrown themselves into it, because they want diversity. Their core is still consulting, but they actually want to be actively involved in growing the business and developing it.
Do you know, it's almost, I love what you're doing there, by the way. And I know we've had conversations here in the past around kind of internal fractional work and internal gig workforce. And I think that's probably where things will end up going is, actually, we need skill sets within the organisation, and we hire Alan for his HR tech consulting skills, not for his CV or for your role or whatever. But you have to have that whole framework of reward mechanisms and performance mechanisms. And for that example, say for example one of your team is a consultant, but they're diving into the marketing side of things, and they get better and better at the marketing. When it comes to performance review, you've got to make sure you're rewarding them for their day job, as it were, but also the marketing stuff as well. And I don't think most companies have kind of got that bit sorted yet.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest challenge is that if you are a scaling business, right, it's exactly the same in our organisation. Everybody has to do a little bit of everything, right, because you can't afford a whole person to do something. But everybody does it because you're in a business that's innovative and it's growing and it's exciting and they're bought into the journey. There comes a point where you become a certain size and process and bonus and operational frameworks stop you doing any of that, because suddenly it's like, and Alan, you've talked about it, 10 to 15% of someone's time billable time is now spent doing something else. You imagine that in a consulting business, if you took that across the board, those are suddenly massive sums of money. And I think that's the challenge and actually I'm not sure it's about skills-based hiring, it's about innovation for me. And how do we keep innovation alive in organizations as they grow? Because it's as much about innovation in people and innovation in thought. And then that comes back to that fluidity of how do we treat our capital like capital, because it will become less fluid if we're helping it to do the stuff that it wants to do. I've gone all full circle in my head. Sorry, that made utter sense in my head. It may not have made utter sense as it came out of my mouth.
It did make sense.
It's not utter sense. Or utter sense, I should say.
Nice.
Cool. Can we talk to Megan now, please?
We can talk to Megan now. I think we've done enough news, Toby. Are you okay if we hand over to Alison?
Absolutely.
I thought you would be. Alison, over to you.
Thank you. So, Megan, you've led yourself into your first question without meaning to, but can you tell me something that you're really good at that you don't want to do anymore?
Well, I guess I really did love sourcing, being the headhunter who would leave no stone unturned to find the unicorn candidates. I love that. I was good at it. And sometimes I miss that kind of chase, that victory, because it's really concrete. You find a candidate. But I didn't feel like I was learning anything, so I don't need to do that anymore. I've also come to the realization that as a data leader, I don't need to be hands-on with the data. I was thinking, I need to upskill and reskill in Python, but following some data leaders and realizing I know I have the big picture. So I don't necessarily need to be an expert at Power BI myself, but I have this background in data analytics to guide specialists to be creative. So I don't necessarily realize I don't need to sit and learn programming. Don't need to do that.
I love that. I think it actually brings more to the party when you look at it through a commercial lens or a what's the story we're trying to tell lens, because we all know that you can get lost in data and you can almost make it tell any story that you want it to if you get lost in it. And actually rising above it, I think is and saying what am I trying to solve, and does this really matter, rather than, oh my God, here is a huge CSV file with lines and lines of data on. What can it tell me? It's a very different view. It's the TI rather than the people analytics in many ways. Yeah.
Exactly. And I would say that now working with some technical people, back to the question about AI skills in the supply, yes, we have a shortage of supply of AI people, but I'm finding that sometimes that skill set doesn't have the creativity necessary to piece together connect all the dots that are necessary in talent intelligence from. Yeah. And so I bring that knowledge of the data generating process and statistics, but also, wait a minute, some of those specialists need direction from the business side and the domain expertise.
Yeah, completely agree. We haven't, I don't think, spoken to anybody who has come from what I'm going to call a core manufacturing business. And actually, I think any business that's manufacturing now is a technology business, right, in some way, shape or form. But I think that has an impact. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and then the wider industry that you're sitting in?
First of all, I think since manufacturing is my first and only exposure to talent intelligence, but listening to others in the industry, I realized I think I have the most interesting job in the world. The manufacturing, one day I'm looking at service technicians and entry level, the shortage of blue collar, getting to know factory workers. I'm an EX30 ambassador, and I went to Milan and met 15 other people from the company. One's the leader of our plant in Malaysia, and another one's a quality engineer in our factory in the US, and one's a PLC automation leader in our factory in southern Sweden. And you just start to see that everyone's a unicorn, and you have exposure to so many issues across talent. We have financial and banking people. We have HR. We have sales. We have every role you can imagine. So you're just constantly learning, which is the most exciting thing. I learn about a whole new domain. So as a political scientist, I'm just exhilarated with every new research question I get.
I love that. And we flippantly talk about blue collar workers, right? But actually, blue collar in your world is an incredibly skilled workforce, right? And which I'm not sure people outside of your world understand. Can you talk a little bit or play a little bit to some of the skills that are needed on the floor in the sites? That would be really interesting.
Absolutely. And actually, it started when one of my first roles as a sourcer was to find production leaders for fast moving consumer good, but frozen food. And of course, those people aren't on LinkedIn. So I had to call a bunch of companies that had similar people and make up a reason and talk to their production manager. And they needed to have incredible technical skill plus leadership, multicultural, multilingual management skill. And so from then I started to realize, wow, actually you work in a factory, you can advance and become a leader and make more money than you would as a white collar person. Mm-hmm. So I think the insight I've gained is that they're the new unicorns. I mean, the Nobel Prize, it was a talent map, European talent map survey that came out in the fall. One of the presenters said, where are we going to get the electricians to drive Europe's green transition? Yeah. So these are highly technical people that need to have leadership skills, and that's not an easy task, and they're not findable on most social media.
Isn't it interesting? We all talk about AI, right? And oh my God, where are we going to get AI? That is not going to solve the how many electricians have we got, right? It's just not going, or plumbers, right? Or whatever it is, right? So it's everything from domestic engineering to blue collar workers in a factory, and how technical that is becoming. There's something really exciting. I can't announce it yet. There's something really exciting that we're going to be doing around blue collar workers in Europe with a partner in May. So watch this space, and Megan, we might loop you into that because there could be something really cool in there. Can you talk a bit about, I referred to Volvo really as becoming a technology business, which I'm not sure is right actually, but can you kind of, Volvo Cars, forgive me, can you sort of talk a little bit about where you think that industry, what's happening in the industry that means we've got this emergence of different skills?
So I think you're absolutely right. It is a tech company, and we see ourselves as a tech company, but that tech includes hardware. And I think R&D is within aerospace, defense, and automotive. The R&D investments for a product that's going to come out 7 to 10 years from now need to be starting. So there's technological forecasting and needing to think about, well, if the universities in the area producing, or anywhere in the world producing, what we're going to need in 5 to 7 years. So it's a tech company, but it has to think long cycle products and hardware, and the intersection of hardware with software. So a lot of manufacturing companies and banking have tended to try to bring tech talent from digital companies that don't have hardware products. And they're finding a bit of a clash of culture because that long 2-week sprints don't always work for a product that is integrated hardware. You think of Volvo car. Now we're integrating to an iOS system, our own operating system. But in past Volvo cars, there have been 300 small computers.
Yeah.
And they're integrated into the hardware. So it's absolutely a tech company, and it has a lot of complexity that software development models don't necessarily work to manage.
As someone who runs a software business, I can tell you that 2-week sprints don't always work in a software business, Megan. Just, but does that mean that you're using a completely different project management methodology, that we're reverting back to kind of waterfall and out of agile?
I think it's an iterative process of taking the best from agile and tech project management, and then bringing in some of the long cycle program management skills that are needed to, and the patience that it takes to see a product through over a 6 to 8 to 9 year period.
And you talked a lot about the intersection, I think, with kind of defense and aerospace. And you touched on this also when you were talking about working with the women in Pakistan. What was that about? What were you doing? You kind of flippantly talked about, well, I was living with 27 women who were aerospace engineers in Pakistan. I was like, what's all that about? Can you tell us what that was?
Well, I was there as working on my dissertation and a consulting project, and dovetailed with my dissertation. I was consulting with an election observation organization, and we were doing a parallel vote tabulation for the 2008 election. And I was doing the data analytics for that and GIS. So I just I wanted to live with Pakistanis. So I found a hostel where I knew there would be women. I could live with them. And it just happened that they were aerospace engineers and software developers. So they were just amazing people. And I visited Pakistan's equivalent of NASA, and saw the satellites they were developing and the airplanes. And so I was really inspired. And also I worked with amazing IT professionals, men and women, at the Free and Fair Election Network.
I love that. You've had such a varied career, I guess, because of your curiosity, right? It's just like, I've seen something and I want to find out more about it. And in some ways that plays back to kind of the skills-based hiring, right? So you haven't been restricted by a job or a title or a role. You've got, that's something really interesting, let me follow it. Is that a kind of fair correlation?
Partially, but I would say it's a little bit too generous. I was ambitious. I grew up in a university town where being either working for the government or being an academic were kind of the pinnacle of success. And working for business was seen as being a bit of a sellout. So my identity was tied up in some ideas of prestige. So when I decided to stay in Sweden and realized that wasn't going to happen, I did have an identity crisis. Like, wait a minute, I have all this education and I'm going to be a recruiter. And so I think we all struggle with that identity. And to move into being a skills-based society, everyone has to kind of let go of that need for prestige or the need for a title. And in some ways, what happened is that I was forced to rethink my whole life, and it freed me. It was liberating to realize. And now I think, actually going back, I would go work in a factory. If I hadn't found the job as a recruiter, and I know what I know now, it would be so exciting to work with all the robots in the factory and just understand manufacturing. Like the CEO of GM is a woman, but she started with factory and manufacturing. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think what's driven me is curiosity and being open to what comes into my path. But there's always that moment where you're like, "Ooh, I don't know. I was supposed to be a professor. I'm a failed academic."
I don't think that's true in any way, shape, or form. Can you've just kind of opened my eyes a little bit, right? So you think about manufacturing, and I think about robots. I think about Volvo Cars or another car manufacturing business. And I don't really know what I see on the shop floor. Can you just open our eyes a little bit? Can you kind of walk us through and tell us what we'd see?
Well, our factory tours we're actually not allowed to take pictures or anything, but there are thousands of, it's so overwhelming because there are different stages. And you know this from doing some of the skills mapping. There's welding, there's paint. The people who are experts in material and chemical processes have to study how the paint goes on. So there are many, many stages in the factory, and it's a massive number of square kilometers in a factory. And each person has the role. There's quality assurance, there are little robots going around, and then you see the manufacturing robots created by another company. How much, it's just mind-boggling, a number of skills and talent that go into creating this massive operation. And that's just the production part of it. That's not the business part. It's not the part of creating the product. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but there's just, you go through the factory and realize it's an entire city.
Yeah, it does in many ways, actually. I think it's, you alluded to it when we first started working together, and we said, let's make sure that we've got the skills in the taxonomy that are going to work for you. And it started with things like welding, right? And I thought, okay, that makes sense. In my, forgive me, restricted mind, okay, that makes sense. That would be in there. And then paint. And then you get into different mixes of paint and chemicals and how they interact together. You're like, oh my God, we're in a whole world that I didn't know existed. And then you talk about robotics and robotics skills that are needed. And then you talk about AI, and then you talk about automation. And as you said, and that's before you've even got to software or somebody deciding that there's not going to be a windscreen in the back of a car, it's so vast, isn't it? I'm capturing your excitement. That's it. I get it. What does that mean?
Sorry to interject. Can I ask a very quick question? Where I live, we're literally 3 or 4 miles away from JCB headquarters, a massive manufacturing company themselves. And they, as I understand it, they don't look at just their own workforce as part of their overall skill set, so to speak, and skill base, but also the next tier down. They have hundreds of third-party suppliers in their supply chain. Do Volvo look at that as well, Megan?
Yes, I do that. I can't talk too much about details, but looking at both talent suppliers, contingency work suppliers, and evaluating them, as well as merger and acquisition, some projects. So, and seeing what our suppliers are, where they're hiring in different parts of the world. I can't even comprehend the number of suppliers.
Well, Megan said that she might get lost halfway through because her computer might need to reboot.
One example is that one of the EX30 ambassadors is the guy who worked on the rear view mirror for the EX30. And he worked with designers that I knew and recruited in user experience and car design. And the back and forth between the design and the engineering of the actual prototype, and then finding suppliers who are going to provide the size of the wires and these, just the story of the rear view mirror for one car model. It opens up a whole supply chain.
It's incredibly complex, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that, Alan. I think it's a really good question. We did some work.
Well, we're only into episode 29, and finally I've managed one.
No, I don't think I've ever had one, right? And particularly not when Nick was involved, right? He always used to get his, that's a really good question. I was like, we did some work with a semiconductor business, and they wanted to understand a particular type of talent in a particular place, right? And they had 30% of the available population. Let's talk about that in a broad sense in this particular location. But when you added in all of their supply chain, they actually had 87% of the total population in that area. And we went, you cannot grow here, right? All of the skills that you need, you either already have or they're in your supply chain. So you've got to start thinking differently about where you're going to grow. And I think we get lost in these kind of tech skills that are not necessarily the skills that are really going to drive our future, and some of the things that Megan has been talking about. Megan, can I check you're back online? You disappeared for a moment. Can you hear us all right?
I can hear.
Yeah, fab. That'd be cool. One of the things that you touched on previously was the fact that you're living in a country where you're working for the largest private employer in that country. Mm-hmm. And you were talking about how the country looks at a regional and a national level at talent gaps. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I think a lot of smaller European countries are in the same boat, but one is, I think in a previous episode, you all talked about how it's not really great to talk about the war for talent. Of course, in Sweden, we compete with other automotive manufacturers, Scania and Volvo Group. There is some competition for talent, but as a whole, we're both trying to attract talent as a country to Sweden and attract companies. And of course, sometimes that's cross purposes. The more companies come here, the more demand there will be for our talent. So we have to, there's a move toward collaborative talent intelligence being used to inform the community, the HR leaders within Sweden and different constellations and consortia of employers to resolve some problems. Like the entire electrification in southern or western Sweden is going to create challenges for many different companies. So there's a university project and different organizations looking together. How can we bring talent? And it's good for us for a career path, if we bring someone from another country, we don't expect they're going to spend their entire career with Volvo Cars. So we need to work with other employers to think, or tell those candidates, hey, you can work for Volvo Cars for a few years and then you can move to a different company. So we need, I think we're starting to have a collaboration in place attraction in some of these in countries where, for example, in Europe, by 2025, there's a need for 800,000 battery talents.
Wow.
So, and that includes all upstream, downstream, blue collar, white collar. So to solve this talent shortage and a mismatch, there's a mismatch in Sweden between the people coming out of university and the skills we need. It's how do we make
Sweden?
I mean, how do we get girls or how do we get anyone to get interested in robots and manufacturing and welding at the grade school level? It's too late by the time they choose high school. So it's really long-term thinking about how do we attract people to these skill sets that are going to be needed for the industry that is extremely important to this country.
We did some work that looked at the skills in the PEMD sector and where they were going to come from, and similar, right? It was like the only way that this is going to be solved as a challenge is by starting way before university and starting with kids and thinking about the education system in a completely different way. And I don't know what the catalyst is going to be to make that happen at a government level, but it sounds like actually Sweden is starting to do it. And if we think about the countries that are doing it, Sweden is starting to do it. Singapore has already done it. Maybe it's the small countries where, I don't know, where there is a bigger impact on industry and on GDP, where they're starting to think about it differently.
It's also a challenge in Sweden, though, because anyone can sort of get funding, tuition and low interest loans to study whatever they want. So people are like, oh, I want to be an artist or I want to be a musician, and then they can't find a job. So we do have a challenge of not being very market driven in terms of what people end up studying. And migration policy is another one. For example, the Nobel Dialogue, the IOM representative said there's a labor shortage across the top 30 economies, but the political dialogue is about stopping migration.
Yes.
So there's a bit of a mismatch between the kinds of incentives that exist within a country for what you should study, and then there's a mismatch of government policy with regard to migration.
You very neatly then segued yourself into kind of my last bit that I really wanted to explore with you. You wrote some really interesting articles on LinkedIn, Megan, about exactly this dialogue around migration, around talent shortages, around international talent in European countries. If you waved a magic wand, what do you think would happen?
If I could have what I want and wave a magic wand?
Yeah, anything that you had.
I mean, I would have a magic wand that would have media programs that are about robots and all the exciting things that are happening in technology and hardware and manufacturing that inspire kids to want to be something other than an influencer. I mean, now we're seeing surveys of leads and other people who say that they want to be an influencer. And I think they're just not being exposed to all of the exciting things that are happening. So we'd be going in and getting kids exposed to. And when I interviewed embedded developers, I got so excited about embedded systems because they have people who are creating little robots at home that follow them around with a fan. And I think if kids could just see that, we would, and girls especially, could get excited about the kinds of skills that are going to be needed in the marketplace.
And then how do you think, if you think at a country level, and I'm with you, right? Yeah, I did. I was lucky enough to win a Women in Innovation Award, right? And I went back to the school that I went to, the primary school, and a bunch of girls, and we sat with pieces of spaghetti and made stuff, right? And then started to say, what could it do? And you could just see them going, oh my goodness me, this is what life could be like, right? And that was before we got as far as turning spaghetti into robots. At a country level, what do you think should happen?
I think there needs to be there's always a trade-off with any business decision, any policy. When I present TI data, I always say, well, I can't tell you whether you should prioritize diversity over cost, or and it's a trade-off at the national policy level as well. So, of course, it's wonderful. My father's an artist, but we want to encourage people to become artists and musicians and philosophers. But I do think that government policy and the public need to be aware of the demand in the marketplace. And if countries don't want to have immigration, then they need to incentivize the people in their local communities studying engineering or semiconductor manufacturing or whatever, and parents not just telling kids, oh, you can do whatever you want and you can make a living. And it sort of pains me to say that, because I think we should be able to do and make a living with whatever we want. But I think exposing the government's creating some incentives to study and make it exciting to study things, and looking at migration policy in collaboration with companies, as well as education policy that upskills people, looks at refugees and immigrant populations in a more inclusive way, and sees work as a way to create belonging for those new populations.
And I think that's so cool, right? And I think if we just took you as an example, Megan, you said kids should be able to do whatever they want, and actually, your core skill is creativity and curiosity, and you're applying that and turning that into whatever it is that you want, right? And I just think that is awesome. That in its own right is a way of saying it's just applying the skills that you have. You're just applying them in a way that you never thought was possible. And maybe that's what we need to do, is that we need to encourage kids and the education system and all of the policies that you've talked about to be going, actually, it's about understanding the art of the possible. It's not understanding. It's not. Yeah. It's not. And equally, and you touched on this. I feel really passionate about this. You touched on this. This is not about stopping immigration, right? That the world is changing in such a way, whether it's climate change or demand for skills, that mass populations of people are going to be living in different places. So it's how do we make sure that those people are able to fulfill their own lives and contribute in a way that they want to be able to do, that equally works for the country in which they are resting.
Exactly. One thing I'd love to add to that, because work is such an important part of our identity, I think the message, there's a really good TED Talk that helped me when I was having my own identity crisis and letting go of being a research professor, which was a TED Talk by Benjamin Todd. Find work you love, don't follow your passion. And another one, I think Scott Dinsmore on TED also said something about loving the job you have. And we tend to say we should follow our passion, but often you don't know until it was this CEO of a recruiting firm that said, "You're perfect for talent acquisition," and me needing a job and then testing it out and realizing it was amazing. And I think that as communities, companies, we need to start saying, maybe try something out first, have a rotation, go work in the factory, to have some empathy with your fellow employees, but also maybe there's something you love that wasn't your passion and you didn't know. And when people follow their passion, they can burn out because they care about it too much, which is what happened to me, I think, as an academic. So it was using talent intelligence to identify adjacent skills, but then we have to partner with employer attraction or learning and development or talent journey people in our companies, and then with governments to sort of get people to fall in love with work they didn't know existed.
That's so interesting because it ties back to some things that you were talking about earlier. It ties back to your story. It ties back to what you were saying about candidates being tied to a role and kind of, not able to mentally move to a skills-based hiring scenario, and actually going, I think the hardest question people ask is, they ask you, particularly when you're a founder of a business, they go, what's your number one purpose and why are you doing it? And you kind of go, I don't know. It's just like, I get up because I'm doing stuff that I like doing. Right. And if we could get everybody to just be in a place where you're going, actually, it's not about your purpose and your passion and driving it. It's about getting up and recognizing the fact that you spend a whole chunk of your life doing work and you need to get up in the morning and want to go to work, because if you don't, you're probably in the wrong job. Right. I think that's really interesting. Cool.
Actually, that's how I kind of think about wrapping this up, because what I think has made, since talent intelligence is new in Sweden and it was new for me, the podcast was incredibly instrumental. And then Toby's book came out and really guided me. But it's that curiosity, and no one really told me what TI should be. So proactively with any job at this kind of role, thinking, what do they need to know that they didn't know they needed to know?
Yes.
Proactively presenting data in a creative and curious way, and then discovering, wow, I really love this and they like it. So it's, I think as a field, we also are kind of in that stage where we can define and shape what this means and what we can offer the business.
I'm so with you, because it's so different, isn't it? It's this is not talent acquisition. This is the commercial value of talent intelligence, and you've summarised that beautifully. Thank you.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm going to be the party pooper and step in and say, folks, it's time. I'm going to call the show to an end. Megan, that was incredible. Thank you so much for your time. How was it for you, as they say?
Thank you. Well, it's super exciting. I think I could talk to you all for the rest of the day. But it's really exciting. The people in this talent intelligence community have been, I can't state enough how much they've helped me develop and contribute to my company, as well as hopefully Sweden. So it's great to be able to hopefully share some insight and be in the company of all of you and the past guests who I have been looking up to for the past year and a half.
Oh, bless you. You're now looked up to.
100%.
Exactly. We aim to please. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Alison, as ever. And thank you to everyone who's listening and for spreading the word and telling everyone about the podcast. Your support is hugely valuable and very much appreciated. And as they say, stay intelligent, folks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Before you go, I wanted for the last time to remind you about our generous sponsor, Stratagens. Here's that posh chap again, telling you about their fabulous product.
Stratagens gives HR leaders the data they need to transform businesses with the speed and ease required in today's world. If you're ready to make decisions that aren't lengthy, costly, one-dimensional, or based on gut feeling, visit stratagens.com. That's stratagens.com to register for a Wednesday demo drop-in and find out more.